Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Sophomore English. We are in Unit 3, the nonfiction unit, and we are now going to take a look at persuasive writing and rhetorical devices. We're going to do this with a couple of disturbing titles. We're going to begin with Elie Wiesel's Keep Memory Alive on page 541. Before we get there, though, let's do a little bit of 2B work at literary analysis, shall we, on page 539. So let's go there, please. Write down persuasive writing. Let's make sure we get a definition here. Including speeches is intended to convince people to take a particular action or position. Persuasive writers present, like to write this one down, arguments or series of logically linked ideas that support a conclusion to defend their ideas. They also use, this is huge, rhetorical devices. We, of course, know this word rhetorical because we use it for 2B all the time, right? Not what a writer says, but how a writer says it. Notice their definition is verbal techniques that create emphasis and appeal to emotions. Writers use both arguments and rhetorical devices to achieve a persuasive purpose. While rhetorical devices cannot replace arguments, they can move readers, helping them to understand, remember, accept a writer's ideas. Some of the common rhetorical devices, make sure you have all of these in your notes at 2B. These are all huge. Notice the first one, repetition. The reuse of keywords, parallelism, similar grammatical structures expressing related ideas, slogans and saws, short catchy phrases, and rhetorical questions, questions that are intended to have obvious answers, ask for effect. In our reading skill, we're going to evaluate persuasion and the writer's argument by looking at the different persuasive techniques, and we want to use an argument chart like that at the bottom of 539 to help us. We want to remind ourselves about our vocabulary work on 540. Let's introduce ourselves to Elie Wiesel, born in 1928. The Romanian-born teacher, philosopher, writer, Elie Wiesel was deported to the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz at age 15. We, of course, in our curriculum read Elie Wiesel's Night, his tragic story, his tragic rendering of the experience at Auschwitz. His parents and sister all perished at the hands of the Nazis. After surviving the war, Wiesel did not write a single word about his wartime experience for 10 years. Finally, in 1955, he wrote an account of his experiences titled, "And the World Kept Silent." His English adaptation of the work, Night, was published in 1960. This is the work that you know. He says, quote, "I wrote it for the other survivors who found it difficult to speak, and I wanted really to tell them, look, you must speak, we must try," end quote. Wiesel was perhaps the first to use the term Holocaust to describe the Nazis' brutal program of persecution. The background for this speech on page 541, the Holocaust, the systematic persecution and murder of Jews and others deemed unfit by Germany's Nazi Party. The Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933 during World War II, 1939 and 1945. Nazi forces killed Jews throughout German-occupied lands or sent them to concentration camps. There, prisoners like Elie Wiesel were worked to death, starved to death, or killed outright. Of course, the tragedy of all tragedies in our 20th century history, no question. Let's take a look now at this exemplar text. Do you see that at the top of 542? Exemplar text, meaning this is one of the, deemed by our textbook company authors, one of the most important titles that we will study together. Let's take a look now at this one and follow along. Our key here is to ask a simple question in 2B. To what degree is this a persuasive speech? What is it that Wiesel is trying to persuade us of? All right, let's make sure we have some sense of it. Let's pay attention now. Very short read, but very, very powerful read. Let's go to work with it.
Keep Memory Alive by Elie Wiesel. It is with a profound sense of humility that I accept the honor you have chosen to bestow upon me. I know your choice transcends me. This both frightens and pleases me. It frightens me because I wonder, do I have the right to represent the multitudes who have perished? Do I have the right to accept this great honor on their behalf? I do not. That would be presumptuous. No one may speak for the dead. No one may interpret their mutilated dreams and visions. It pleases me because I may say that this honor belongs to all the survivors and their children, and through us, to the Jewish people with whose destiny I have always identified. I remember, it happened yesterday or eternities ago. A young Jewish boy discovered the kingdom of night. I remember his bewilderment. I remember his anguish. It all happened so fast. The ghetto, the deportation, the sealed cattle car, the fiery altar upon which the history of our people and the future of mankind were meant to be sacrificed.
544.
I remember. He asked his father, "Can this be true? This is the 20th century, not the Middle Ages. Who would allow such crimes to be committed? How could the world remain silent?" And now the boy is turning to me. "Tell me," he asks, "what have you done with my future? What have you done with your life?" And I tell him that I have tried to keep memory alive, that I have tried to fight those who would forget, because if we forget, we are guilty. We are accomplices. And then I explained to him how naive we were, that the world did know and remain silent. And that is why I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented.
Our reading of this real brief speech is compelling for a number of reasons. Let's begin by just asking at level one, what is it fundamentally that Elie Wiesel is saying in this speech? So let's begin there. Let's say there's three things that for sure he wants to say. One, the first is he wants to say that he is humbled, that he is both frightened as well as pleased at the award that he is receiving. When he receives this award, he gives this speech. Notice he says he's frightened because he doesn't know if he has the right to accept this. No one may speak for the dead, he says. And of course, over 8 million Jews and others died alone during this experience of the 4 years of the Holocaust. He says that it pleases him because he may say the honor belongs to all survivors and their children and to the Jewish people with whose destiny I've always identified. Number two, as a reflective essay almost, as we studied those, he looks backward to the small child that he was who arrived at Auschwitz, the kingdom of night, he calls it. He remembers on page 543 the deportation, the sealed cattle car, the fiery altar upon which the history of our world and the future of mankind were meant to be sacrificed. Notice that for Wiesel, he will always make the argument that the Holocaust was not just about the sacrificing of the Jewish people, but rather all of humankind. Notice on page 544, he says, he remembers that he asked his dad, his father, how is this possible? Who could allow such crimes to be committed? We're not in the Middle Ages, he said to his father. What's going on? The third part, now he moves to the present. Now he sees that young boy who was himself asking really powerful questions. Two questions, which many of my sophomores have just been blown away by. You know what I mean? You kind of go through your freshman year, and then all of a sudden you land in your sophomore year, and you're kind of like, you're not totally focused on the experience of high school. You're doing other things. It's gotten to be a boring, repetitive experience. And all of a sudden a question or two like this one come up. Look at them. I'm on page 544. What have you done with my future? The young kid asks the older Elie Wiesel. And what have you done with your life? Compelling questions. Ending, of course, with the major observation. We cannot remain silent. To remain silent is to allow for this to happen, to be an accomplice. And that's unforgivable in every way, he says. If we forget, if we remain silent, he says, we encourage the tormentor, never the tormented. All right, let's go to 2a really quickly, themes, messages. Go ahead and jot down, what is for you the most powerful theme message? It seems to me that there's a political message and then there's a personal message. Yeah? The political message here is obvious. If the world ever forgets what happened in near the middle of the 20th century, if the world ever forgets that, we could easily go back and allow for that kind of insanity to happen again. Prejudice, bias, extreme violence against the people, that all must be remembered, or it will be repeated. The great historian at Harvard, Santayana, said, those who forget the past are damned to repeat it. Certainly Wiesel would agree with that. Number 2, message. It's clear with these 2 questions that a personal reading of this is, what are you doing with your life? That challenge. Live your life to the fullest. Of course, if 3a, we can already think about our text from our freshman year, Psalm of Life, and the idea that in this world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife. Stand up against violence. Stand up against injustice. Wherever that injustice is, it might be in our school, it might be in our community, our state, our nation, our world, wherever that is, Wiesel is reminding you, you have to stand up. When you see inappropriate behavior, for example, in our school halls, when you see the acts of bullying, you have to stand up. If you don't stand up, you are complicit. You're an accomplice in some way. This is his argument. It's a compelling argument. At 2b, let's just point out a couple of the ways, rhetorically speaking, that Wiesel's speech, while short, is quite profound. Did you notice in the second paragraph on 543, did you notice the repetitions? Do I have the right to represent the multitudes who have perished? Do I have the right to accept this great honor? Notice the parallelism. It frightens me, second paragraph on 543. It pleases me, the next paragraph. Right? Notice we've got the reflections at the beginning of I remember. Notice the repetition of I remember. I remember on to page 544. I remember. Do you see this? Right? That notion of using these rhetorical skills. Jot down, what is the effect of that repetition, that parallelism in a brief speech like this? The effect, of course, is almost like a gong that's going off, like a bell that's going off, right? To say, you need to hear what I'm saying. You need to hear what I'm saying. Don't miss what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like this going off, compelling. At 3a, what are the texts for you that most speak to this kind of challenge, this kind of horror? The idea that you have to stand up and you have to be counted. You have to make sure that you are one of the, if you will, supporters of the right, the justice. That is, we know this, a part of human existence. We know that this is what it means to be human, to say to the bully, to say to someone involved in injustice, no, it's absolutely wrong. When your juniors will work with the great Frederick Douglass, that great emancipated slave in his text. We mentioned Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, another classic text. There's so many different titles that come to mind. What are the ones for you that say you have to stand up, you have to be counted? It's hypercritical that not only you speak love, but you act love. Yes, right? It's not enough to just speak the words. You have to actually commit the acts. Do the right thing, if you will. Finally, at 3b, I want to go back to these questions. They're powerful ones, and I want you to respond to them in your own writing and in your own way. What have you done with my future? Imagine for a moment that you could meet your 5th grade self. Isn't that weird to think about? Imagine for a moment if you could meet your 5th grade self. And you would say to your 5th grade self, let me tell you about the next 5 years. I think 5th grade to the sophomore year, 10th grade, is 5 years. And you talk to your 5th grade self, and your 5th grade self says, tell me about the next 5 years. I mean, we made it here to 5th grade. We did it. What did you do with the next 5 years? Can you explain it to me? What's it like? What's it going to be like? What do I need to be worried about? What did you do? And then, of course, the next question. What if you met your 50-year-old self? Somehow, through some strange technology, you could meet your 50-year-old self and you'd look at yourself and go, is that you? Whoa, I've really changed a lot. Online you can find those technologies that age you to show you what you're going to look like someday. So you meet your 50-year-old self, and your 50-year-old self looks back. What do you imagine your 50-year-old self is going to say to you? In terms of the second question, what have you done with my future? In other words, the point here is your life is precious. It's a gift. What are you doing with that gift? Are you using it to do something great? Back to Psalm of Life, notice lives of great men, and we would say today women, all remind us we can make our lives sublime. And departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. To what degree are you challenging yourself every day to prepare for that future? That is the heart of what's being said here. Whatever it is that you do with your life, you have to stand up and fight against oppression and fight against injustice. That is the point of a man who endured the horrific experience and came out on the other side and decided he would write about it finally. And we're so grateful that he did. I hope that you've been challenged by the brief text. Notice, they don't have to be long texts to be powerful, do they? Thank you.